They thought the remarriage was finally going to happen without another complication. The invitations were ready, the family had accepted the decision, and your soulmate was trying to convince themselves that the past was completely over. But then their own son refused to attend the ceremony, and the reason had everything to do with you. He asked one question nobody in that family was prepared to answer. And the moment your soulmate heard it, everything they had been trying to bury came rushing back. Listen carefully. Because this was not a simple argument between a parent and a child. Your soulmate had spent weeks preparing for this remarriage, telling everyone around them that they were ready to move forward, ready to start another chapter, ready to stop looking backward at the love story that once connected them to you. On the outside, everything looked settled. The plans were moving forward, relatives were discussing the ceremony, clothes had been chosen, arrangements had been made, and people had already started talking as though this marriage was guaranteed to happen. But inside that home, one person had never fully accepted what everyone else was pretending to accept. Their son had been watching quietly. He had seen the way your soulmate became distant whenever your name was mentioned. He had noticed how certain memories were never thrown away. He had noticed that whenever someone talked about the future, your soulmate smiled, but that smile never reached their eyes. Then, only days before the remarriage, the son finally said what he had been holding back. He told your soulmate that he would not attend the ceremony until one question was answered truthfully. At first, everyone thought he was being emotional. Someone told him that this was not the time to create problems. Another relative tried to convince him to stay quiet and support the family. But he refused. He looked directly at your soulmate and said, "Before you marry someone else, I need to know why you never went back and told them the truth." The entire room became uncomfortable. Your soulmate immediately knew exactly who he meant. You. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Your soulmate tried to change the subject, but their son would not allow it. He had apparently learned something recently, something about the separation, something about the decisions that were made years ago, and something about a conversation your soulmate had never told the family about. He asked why you had been allowed to believe that your soulmate stopped loving you when that was never completely true. He asked why nobody had ever contacted you after the family discovered that part of the story had been misunderstood. And then he asked the question that hit your soulmate harder than anything else. If they knew everything you know now, would they still believe you chose to lose them? That question changed the entire atmosphere. Your soulmate stopped defending the remarriage. They stopped talking about schedules, guests, plans, and promises. Instead, they became silent because their son had touched the one truth they had been avoiding for years. This remarriage was supposed to prove that they had moved on. But deep inside, they knew there was still unfinished business between you. Not necessarily because they expected you to return, but because you had never been given the complete truth about why everything ended. And their son knew it. Don't skip. Because what he revealed next was something even your soulmate did not realize he had discovered. Weeks earlier, he had found an old message connected to you. It was not romantic. It was not dramatic. But it proved that you had once tried to get clarity about what happened, and someone had made sure your soulmate never saw the message at the time. Their son had been holding on to that discovery because he did not know whether reopening the past would help or hurt anyone. But when he saw the remarriage becoming real, he decided he could no longer stay silent. He placed the old message in front of your soulmate. Your soulmate read it once. Then again. And their hands started trembling. Because suddenly they understood something devastating. For years, they had believed you walked away without fighting for the relationship. But this message suggested the opposite. You had reached out. You had wanted answers. You had tried to understand why everything changed so suddenly. And someone had stood between you. Their son looked at them and said, "Now answer me honestly. If you had seen this back then, would you still have let them go?" Your soulmate could not answer. The person they were preparing to marry was in another room discussing final arrangements, unaware that the entire future of the ceremony had just been thrown into uncertainty. Family members began exchanging worried looks. One relative quietly asked the son where he found the message. And that was when he revealed there was more. The message was only the beginning. He had also discovered who had hidden it. And when he finally said that person's name, your soulmate stood up so quickly that everyone in the room froze, because the person responsible was someone they had trusted for years. The name their son revealed was not the name of an enemy. It was not an ex, not a stranger, and not someone your soulmate had ever suspected of interfering. It was someone who had been welcomed into private family conversations, someone who knew exactly how deeply your soulmate once cared about you, and someone who had repeatedly insisted that ending that relationship was for the best. That was why your soulmate could barely process what they were hearing. For years, they had trusted this person's version of events. They had believed that you stopped trying, that you accepted the separation, and that eventually you built a completely different life without looking back. But now their own son was sitting there with evidence that suggested the entire story had been shaped by someone else. Your soulmate immediately demanded an explanation. The relative who had been named tried to dismiss everything as an old misunderstanding, but the son refused to let the conversation be buried again. He said there were dates, saved messages, and details that lined up too perfectly to be coincidence. He explained that your message had arrived during one of the most emotionally confusing periods of your soulmate's life, when the family had already been pressuring them to stop looking backward. Instead of showing your soulmate what you had written, this person kept it hidden and later told them that you had made your decision and wanted nothing more to do with the relationship. That sentence changed everything. Because your soulmate remembered that exact period. They remembered waiting. They remembered checking their phone. They remembered wondering why you never tried one last time. And now they were discovering that maybe you had. Their son looked directly at them and said, "You spent years believing they gave up on you. What if they spent those same years believing you gave up on them?" Nobody in that room had an answer. Your soulmate sat back down, completely shaken. Suddenly, the remarriage plans sitting on the table looked different. The guest list, the ceremony details, the promises they were preparing to make, all of it had been built around the belief that the chapter involving you had ended honestly. But what if it never did? What if the relationship did not collapse because two people stopped loving each other, but because one person decided they should never hear each other's truth? The relative finally admitted that they had intercepted the message. But their explanation made your soulmate even more emotional. They claimed they had been trying to protect them. They said your soulmate had been vulnerable, exhausted, and under pressure, and they feared that hearing from you would pull them back into a relationship the family believed had become too complicated. They insisted they never expected the separation to become permanent. They thought there would eventually be another conversation. They thought the truth would come out later. But later never came. Years passed. Lives changed. And now your soulmate was preparing to marry someone else while carrying a version of the past that had never been complete. Their son could not hide his frustration anymore. He asked the relative one simple question: if you were protecting them, why did you keep lying even after they were strong enough to hear the truth? Silence. That silence told your soulmate more than any confession could. Because suddenly this was no longer about one hidden message. It was about years of manipulation, assumptions, and decisions made without their consent. Your soulmate began asking whether there had been other messages, other attempts, other moments when you had tried to reach them. At first, the relative said no. Then the son pulled out something else. A second piece of evidence. This one was dated months after the first message. Your soulmate looked at it and instantly recognized your words. It was another attempt from you. Another unanswered attempt. Another moment they had never known existed. Their face changed completely. They whispered, "There was more than one." The son nodded. And that was the moment the remarriage stopped feeling like a celebration and started feeling like a decision that could no longer be made until the past was confronted. Your soulmate walked away from the family table and went into another room alone. Nobody followed them at first. They needed space because too many memories were colliding at once. They remembered the night they finally accepted that you were gone. They remembered telling themselves they had to stop hoping. They remembered forcing themselves to build a life around the belief that you had chosen silence. Now they were learning that your silence may never have been your choice. A few minutes later, their son walked into the room. He did not ask them to cancel the remarriage. He did not tell them to run back to you. He simply said, "I'm not asking you to choose them. I'm asking you to stop making the biggest decision of your life while believing a lie." Those words broke through every defense your soulmate had built. For the first time, they admitted something they had never said openly. They said, "If I had known they were still trying to reach me, my life might have gone in a completely different direction." Their son quietly asked, "Do you still want to know what they were trying to tell you?" Your soulmate looked at him. Because there was apparently one final message he had not shown them yet. A message written much later than the others. And unlike the first two, this one was never simply asking for answers. It contained a confession from you about the future you once believed the two of you would still have together. Their son handed over the message. But before your soulmate could finish reading it, someone appeared in the doorway. It was the person they were preparing to marry. And judging by the expression on their face, they had already heard enough of the conversation to realize that your name had just changed everything. The person standing in the doorway did not ask what was happening. They had already heard enough to understand that this was not some harmless memory from the past. They had heard your name. They had heard the words, hidden messages. And most importantly, they had heard your soulmate admit that their entire life might have gone differently if the truth had reached them years ago. For a moment, nobody moved. Your soulmate was still holding the final message in their hands, their son was standing beside them, and the person they were supposed to marry was staring at both of them with an expression that made the room feel even heavier. Then came the question nobody wanted to answer. Were you ever really over them? Your soulmate looked down. That hesitation was enough. The person they were preparing to marry slowly stepped into the room and asked again, this time more quietly. They were not angry yet. They simply wanted the truth before standing in front of family and making a lifelong promise. Your soulmate tried to explain that this was not about choosing between two people. It was about discovering that the ending they had lived with for years might never have been the real ending at all. But that explanation only created another painful question. If you learn today that they never stopped trying to reach you, what exactly does that change? Your soulmate could not answer quickly. Because it changed too much. It changed the way they remembered the separation. It changed the nights they blamed you. It changed the years they spent convincing themselves that you had forgotten them. And now, only days before another marriage, they were discovering that some of the biggest decisions of their life had been based on information that was never true. Their son remained silent until the person preparing to marry your soulmate turned toward him and asked, "What else did you find?" He looked at your soulmate first, almost as if asking permission. Then he said there was one more thing. Not another message. A recording. The room went completely still. The recording had been saved by the same relative who intercepted your messages. Their son had discovered it accidentally while searching through an old storage folder. At first, he thought it was just another family audio file. But when he played it, he heard two voices. One belonged to the relative. The other belonged to you. Your soulmate's face immediately changed. They asked, "You heard their voice?" The son nodded. He explained that the recording appeared to have been made during a phone conversation nobody had ever told your soulmate about. You had apparently contacted the family directly after your messages went unanswered. You were trying to understand why your soulmate had suddenly disappeared from your life. You were asking for only one thing, a chance to speak to them personally before accepting that everything was over. But the relative never gave you that chance. Instead, the recording captured that person telling you something devastating. They told you your soulmate had already made a final decision. They told you not to contact them again. They told you that continuing to reach out would only make things worse. And then they said something that made your soulmate cover their mouth in disbelief. They told you that your soulmate had personally asked the family to make sure you stayed away. That was never true. Your soulmate immediately stood up. No. I never said that. Their voice was louder now. The person they were preparing to marry looked toward the hallway where the relative was still standing with other family members. Nobody could pretend this was a misunderstanding anymore. Someone had not simply hidden a message. Someone had spoken on your soulmate's behalf and deliberately convinced you that you were unwanted. Their son said, "That's why I refused to attend the wedding until you knew." Suddenly his decision made perfect sense. He was not trying to destroy the remarriage. He was trying to stop his parent from making another permanent decision before understanding the first one. Your soulmate demanded that the recording be played. The son hesitated. He warned them that hearing your voice after all these years might be difficult. But your soulmate insisted. So he pressed play. The first few seconds contained nothing but background noise. Then your voice came through. And your soulmate froze. Years disappeared in an instant. They recognized the tone immediately. They recognized the way you spoke when you were trying not to become emotional. They recognized the pauses between your words. And although so much time had passed, hearing you again pulled something out of them they had spent years trying to bury. On the recording, you asked, "Can you just tell them I'm not asking for anything except one conversation?" Your soulmate closed their eyes. Then the relative's voice answered. "There's nothing left to discuss." You remained quiet for several seconds. Then you asked the question that shattered your soulmate completely. "Did they really say they never want to hear from me again?" The recording went silent for a moment. Then came the lie. "Yes." Your soulmate began crying. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just silently, because they finally understood what you had believed all these years. You had not walked away because you stopped caring. You walked away because someone convinced you that staying would mean disrespecting their wishes. The recording continued. Your voice became softer. "If that is truly what they want, I'll leave them alone. But please tell them I never stopped caring. And tell them I would have stayed if they had asked me to." The son stopped the recording. Nobody asked him to. He simply could not continue. The person your soulmate was preparing to marry had tears in their eyes now too, because this was no longer some romantic fantasy about an old love. This was evidence that two lives had been redirected by a lie. Your soulmate looked at the relative and asked one question. "Why?" At first, the relative said nothing. Then they finally admitted the truth. They believed you were going to take your soulmate away from the family. They believed the relationship was becoming too serious. They feared your soulmate would choose a future with you that did not include the plans the family had made for them. So they interfered. They expected your soulmate to eventually forget. They expected you to move on. They expected time to erase everything. But time had not erased it. It had only buried it. And now it had resurfaced at the worst possible moment. The person your soulmate was preparing to marry slowly removed something from their hand. The engagement ring. They placed it on the table. Your soulmate immediately looked up. But before they could say anything, the person said, "I'm not ending this because of them. I'm stopping this because you deserve to know what your heart would choose if nobody else was making the decision for you." Then they walked out of the room. Your soulmate did not follow. They simply stared at the ring. Their son sat beside them. For several minutes, neither spoke. Finally, your soulmate whispered, "What am I supposed to do now?" Their son answered with the one thing nobody in that family had allowed years ago. "Ask them yourself." Your soulmate looked at him. "Ask who?" He did not need to say your name. Then he reached into his pocket and placed a folded piece of paper on the table. Your soulmate opened it. There was a phone number written inside. A number connected to you. And according to their son, he had confirmed only hours earlier that it was still active. Your soulmate stared at that number for a long time. Then they picked up their phone. Their finger hovered over the screen. But just before they could make the call, another message appeared. An unknown number. Your soulmate opened it. There were only 7 words on the screen. "I think you finally know the truth." And beneath those words was your name.